What is the darkest secret your house is hiding? Do you ever get the feeling that you're being watched, or that there's something in your home that shouldn't be there? If you're like me, you probably don't need much encouragement to believe in ghosts. But if you need a little nudge, then let me tell you about one of the most horrifying crimes in American history, the Villisca Axe murders. June 10, 1912, will forever be remembered as one of the darkest days in human history. On this day, 8 people were brutally murdered in their sleep by an unknown assailant, who went on a rampage through the town of Villisca, Iowa. This unsolved mystery has baffled investigators for over a century and continues to send shivers down the spines of those who hear about it today. It was just a normal day in the small town of Villisca, Iowa. Population 2,000. Children played in the streets. Birds sang in the trees, and the only sound that could be heard from within the moor family home was the gentle snores of its 8 sleeping occupants. Little did they know that in just a few short hours, their lives would be cut tragically short, and their home would become a scene of one of the most heinous crimes in history. Amongst the victims were 4 young children, 2 of whom were just 8 years old. The eldest victim was 12-year-old Herman, who had been staying at the home of his grandparents and 2 aunts after his parents had passed away. His younger sister Mary was just 10 years old when she became the victim of this brutal massacre. Also, sleeping peacefully in the house were 8-year-old Catherine and her younger brother Paul, both daughters of George and Laura, who were staying at the home while their mother recuperated from a recent surgery. And finally, there was Lena, the 6-year-old daughter of Nona and Arthur Jones, who were also visiting the town. But what happened next would shock the nation and leave investigators scratching their heads for decades to come. In the early hours of June 10, 1912, an unknown assailant crept into the home and began hacking away at the sleeping family members with an axe, killing them all in their beds. When the sun rose that morning, neighbors began to notice a strange sight. The curtains in the Moore family home were drawn, despite no one inside being known to be a heavy sleeper. Curiosity got the better of them, and they soon realized that the house was eerily silent, which was also strange because children could normally be heard playing outside. Concerned by the lack of activity coming from the usually lively household, the neighbors decided to investigate further. One neighbor recalled seeing a curtain in the bedroom of 12-year-old Herman Moore move slightly, and he could have sworn he saw someone standing behind it. Another witness later claimed to have seen a man running from the direction of the Moore house towards the train tracks, clutching something in his hands. However, these sightings were not taken seriously at the time, and were quickly forgotten. As the day wore on, more and more people gathered outside the house, trying to figure out what had happened to the family. Some even claimed to have heard screams and the sound of a struggle coming from inside the house around 4 a.m. that morning. But those claims were also dismissed as mere speculation. It wasn't until one of the braver townspeople finally knocked down the front door and stepped inside that the true horror of what had happened was revealed. The sight that greeted them was one of the most gruesome scenes of violence that anyone had ever witnessed. 8 bodies lay scattered across the floor of the various rooms, each having been brutally hacked to death with an axe. The victims were found lying in different positions, as if they had been trying to flee for their lives, but they had nowhere to go. Their faces had been wrapped in cloths, presumably to muffle their screams. The small children were found in their underwear, and the older kids had their clothing torn and bloodied. The brutality of the crime was shocking, and the lack of motive even more so. There was nothing to suggest why the killer had chosen to attack this particular family, nor was there any sign of forced entry. It was as if the killer had simply appeared out of thin air and carried out his heinous crime before vanishing without a trace. As news of the tragedy spread, People from neighboring towns came to pay their respects and help search for clues. The killer was never found, and the case remains open to this day. What makes this crime particularly disturbing is the fact that all 8 victims were killed in their own beds while asleep, making it impossible for them to defend themselves. The killer had shown no mercy, not even to the youngest victims, 6-year-old Lena Jones and 8-year-old Catherine and Paul, who were staying in the house with their parents. The most heartbreaking part of this tragedy was that the children had been staying in the home of their grandparents, Christian and Peter Moore, who had raised Herman and Mary after the death of their parents. The couple had lost their son just a year earlier, and now they had lost their beloved grandchildren, as well as their daughter and son-in-law. It was a devastating blow that no family should ever have to endure. In the aftermath of the crime, the town of Villisca was left reeling in shock and disbelief. Many residents felt that the police were not doing enough to find the killer and bring him to justice. So they took matters into their own hands and formed a volunteer posse to search for clues. They combed through the nearby woods and searched every inch of the land, but to no avail. The killer had vanished without a trace, and it seemed as if he would never be found. The theory that has the most evidence to back it up is that George Kelly, who was convicted of killing 2 women in Wisconsin a few months prior to the axe murders, was responsible for the crimes. Unfortunately, he was already behind bars at the time of the murders, so he couldn't have been the perpetrator. Despite the lack of physical evidence, some believe that George Kelly could still be the culprit. And if that's true, it means that he had somehow managed to escape from prison and return to his hometown of Valdez, where he committed the murders before disappearing again. Another suspect is a mysterious drifter named John Orr, who was known to frequent the area around Valdez. Witnesses reported seeing him running from the direction of the Moore house around the time of the murders. But he was never caught, and the charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. To this day, no one knows for sure who was responsible for the brutal slayings. It's possible that we may never know what really happened that night, or why the killer chose to spare the lives of the 3 adults in the house and take the lives of the 8 children instead. After the tragic event, the house was abandoned and left to rot. It stood empty and neglected for several years, before finally being torn down in 1923. But it wasn't until 1994 that a local paranormal investigation team decided to revisit the site. They uncovered some truly disturbing evidence that suggested the spirits of the murdered children still lingered there. Using a thermal imaging camera, they detected strange cold spots in the exact spot where the children's bodies had been found. And when they returned to the house during the day, they noticed that the temperature suddenly plummeted to below freezing. These findings, along with reports of unexplained footsteps and whispers in the attic, convinced many that the house was haunted by the ghosts of its former occupants. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence came when a psychic medium conducted in the basement of the house. During the session, she made some shocking revelations. She claimed that the killer of the Moore family had been a friend of the family who had been invited into their home. She also said that the killer had used an axe to carry out the murders, a detail that was not known to the public at the time. Furthermore, she described the killer as a large man with red hair, which matched the description of a man who had been seen near the house at the time of the murders. Although this information was never verified, it still makes for a chilling tale. In 2001, a group of paranormal investigators known as the Ghost Seekers conducted their own investigation of the house, using a variety of high-tech equipment, including electromagnetic field meters and digital audio recorders. They hoped to capture evidence of the spirits that were said to haunt the property. One of the investigators, Toby Siglo, claimed that they recorded voices, footsteps, and even the sound of a woman screaming in the attic. Despite the alleged paranormal activity, very little is known about what really happened to the family. Some believe that the killer was never caught and brought to justice. Others believe that the case was never properly investigated in the first place. Whatever the truth may be, the mystery of the Villetta axe murders remains one of the most perplexing unsolved crimes in American history. Today, the house is gone, but the legend of the Villetta axe murders lives on. Visitors to the town often report hearing strange noises and seeing apparitions that appear and vanish before their eyes. Some even claim to have felt the icy touch of a ghost, or heard the disembodied laughter of a child playing in the street. If you've ever visited the town or are planning a trip there, be sure to keep your eyes and ears open for any signs of paranormal activity. You never know what you might witness while exploring one of America's most haunted places.